Okay, so we're going to talk about birdscaping, and this is actually something that, though mostly what I do for my business, Experience Olympic, is guide people and take people birding and take people tide pooling and take people hiking. I also will come to your house to help you plan for how to attract birds to your house. So consultation on plants and nest boxes and water features and stuff like that. So that's just something else just for you to know that I also do. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about how and why to invite native birds and plants into your yard. And so this bird right here, this is the feeder that I call Copper Top. I really like this feeder. I got it from Wild Birds. And notice how extensive the roof is. I think with any kind of bird feeding in the Pacific Northwest, we really need to make sure that we keep food dry. And so I really like that feature of this. And then the starlings can still get on, access this feeder, but it takes a pretty acrobatic starling. And I've noticed that they don't like to go to my backyard as much as my front yard. So I try to kind of put this one in the backyard. And then this is a Downy Woodpecker. I don't live in, I live in town, as I said, close to downtown 3rd and Cherry. And so I don't actually get hairy woodpeckers. We'll see a photo of one, because if I go on a walk and I go, up past Highway 101, Lauridsen, once I get back up higher on Valley Creek, because I live on Valley Creek, then I start to get hairy woodpeckers. But right around where I am, I do not get them. So we are going to talk about 3 billion birds lost, native birds and plants, habitat. We're going to break it up. So right now, we're going to talk about food and water. Next Wednesday, we're going to talk about shelter and space. We're going to talk about cats and windows. We're going to talk about some critter concerns, and we're going to talk about invasive birds. And so this is a red-breasted nuthatch, and everything's really vocal at this time of year, but they're the kind of ones that kind of go like that. And so it's good to concentrate on ones that are pretty easy to learn. And if you're interested in learning more about vocalizations, now is the time to do it. Although now you might kind of like get a little crazy if you do it at dawn or even pre-dawn, because everything's like really loud, and they're just going to get louder into May. Sometimes it's a little easier to do it in the off season, so you kind of learn the Pacific wren and learn some like easier birds before like all these migratory birds come back here to breed, and then it just gets really loud. And then as we talked about before, birds like woodpeckers that are not songbirds, they do other things in order to define their territory, attract a mate, and continue the circle of life. And so the hairy woodpecker, which you can see here, so its beak is much longer, and it's overall a much larger bird than the downy woodpecker. And otherwise, though, they look very similar. And you can differentiate them a little bit sometimes by habitat. Like downies are often with smaller trees, and hairies are oftentimes with older growth trees. But, you have to be careful with that kind of stuff, because there's always exceptions. So our collective feeder and garden decisions make a difference. And I just want to highlight the Anna's hummingbird to make that comparison. So the hummingbird with the beautiful red head, both on its throat and also above on its forehead, is the male Anna's hummingbird. Then the other hummingbird that you see here, which is a smaller hummingbird, is the Rufus hummingbird. Also look at its tail. Its tail is a little bit different, more pointed. But also it does not have the vibrant color on its forehead. Its vibrant color is just underneath its chin. It is kind of like a coppery orange, but in certain light, honestly, it can even look red. So it just kind of depends on like how the sun hits those beautiful feathers. One thing though to notice is that it does kind of have that white collar, and you see that on both the male and the female, that they kind of have that white collar that even in bad light, you can usually see that. And then the male is rufous all over. So that kind of like body color is all over the bird. So, and then the Anna's basically is a bird that moved from California up here to the Olympic Peninsula and actually even farther north. So you find that it on Vancouver Island as well. And it's basically because it's able to overwinter here because so many people have hummingbird feeders and so many people have different plants that bloom at different times of the year. So, and actually Anna's, unlike other hummingbirds, a large percentage of their diet is insects. So if there's any insects to be found, the Anna's hummingbird, like you'll even see them fly catching, like a lot of songbirds do. And they'll also eat sap if desperate. So they'll go to sapsucker holes and they'll eat sap. So they find a way to make it through the winter, and largely human habitation keeps the climate warmer, you know, like has a lot of benefits to them to be able to successfully overwinter. So they just keep spreading north, whereas the Rufus hummingbird migrates. And so they have just recently come back here to breed. So this is a fairly recent study that you might be familiar with. It's 2.9, but for just common, you hear 3 billion birds gone since 1970, and you can see kind of the chart in the bottom there, and these are different optics that I got from the Let's Bring Birds Back. And so I'm using it for this presentation. So some of those ideas, and we're not going to discuss all of these, we're going to discuss like the habitat ones, but you know, drink shade grown coffee is a choice, right? Reduce plastic use, also a choice. Do citizen science, a choice. So windows safer, yeah, it's a choice, but it's also one that, you know, we have control over in our habitat, in our house. And so that one we're going to discuss. Keep cats indoors, kind of simple, but yet kind of not if you have like a stray or something. So we're going to talk about that. Use native plants, we're going to talk about that, and then avoid pesticides, and we're going to talk about that as well. So kind of those four on the right are the ones that we're going to discuss, but reducing plastic use, yay, and drinking shade-grown coffee as well. Okay, so this is another one that I gleaned from that same website, and I just want to focus on the loss of boreal forest birds. So boreal meaning like high forests, right? And so we have high forests here, you know, anywhere where you get up to about 2,000 feet. So like really kind of Lake Dawn, and higher is kind of like those higher level forests, right? And so you start to get different species. And so these are some of the yard birds that you have in boreal forests. So dark-eyed junco, evening grosbeak, hermit thrush, ruby-crowned kinglet, yellow-rump warbler, orange-crowned warbler, and golden-crowned sparrow. And so these are birds that overwinter. Like I pretty much have all of these birds overwintering here, although I'm trying to get more yellow-rump warblers and evening grosbeaks. I don't usually get those. I kind of need to be in a little bit different habitat, but hermit thrush I've had in my yard. I always have a lot of dark-eyed juncos. I usually have a couple ruby-crowned kinglets and also orange-crowned warblers and definitely golden-crowned sparrows. So they're hanging out with me for the winter because I'm down low by the, you know, I'm close to sea level. But these are birds that, you know, are experiencing a lot of issues because of climate change and so forth. And so, you know, they're breeding up high. And so there's been a loss of 500 million boreal forest birds since 1970. So 9 in 10 evening grosbeaks have been lost. So that's quite a lot to consider. The other big group that I really want to concentrate on and think about are the Ariel Insectivore yard birds. And these, pretty much all of these birds are migratory. So I only get them during the summer. And that includes the barn swallow, the violet green swallow, the tree swallow, purple martin, Vox's swift, and common nighthawk. And of these, the only one that I'm really able to provide habitat for, because I have like a little small space, is the violet green swallow. And so I have spent years trying to have the right nest box and put it in the right spot. And so I'm happy to report that the last 2 years, I believe I've successfully fledged young. There seemed to be a nestling poking its head out of the nest box the last 2 years, and then they were gone. So, I mean, that's pretty much all I have. And of course, you know, fledged birds are the most vulnerable birds in the population. They're just very prone. You know, it's difficult to learn how to fly. It's difficult to learn how to feed yourself. So all of those things make them very vulnerable. So there's usually like a big population loss at that point. But, you know, you can't, you know, help the population if they're not successfully reproducing. So that's one that I'd like us all to concentrate on, that we can really all, as long as you have an open airway, and especially if you live in town where, you know, we have like kind of natural clear cuts, basically, you can get these birds. So if you look here at barn swallows, 2 and 5 have been lost since 1970, and there's been a loss of 160 million Ariel insectivores since 1970. So native species, and this is just talking about plants and animals, we're not talking about people here. A native species is part of the balance of nature that has evolved in a particular region or ecosystem. And so I've included 2 native species here, the chestnut-backed chickadee and also the ruby-crowned kinglet. And so the ruby-crowned kinglet can be confused for the Hutton's vireo. So it's kind of a tricky one. And then the chestnut-backed chickadee can be confused with the black-capped chickadee. So that's another one that, you know, there's almost always a look-alike bird. Some are worse than others. So it's really good to kind of get to know the birds that you have in your habitat. So an ecosystem, and I like to think of like, you know, I've got my yard, I've got my habitat, but then, you know, I have like kind of the greater, you know, neighborhood. And even though it's kind of not exactly a well-functioning ecosystem because I live in town, you know, there are kind of still remnant functioning ecosystems within that area because I live near Valley Creek, right? And so, you know, even though I'm at the part where it actually goes underground, you know, we still actually had a river otter run through our yard at some point who was obviously very lost. So, you know, there's still that remnant there. There's still those corridors, you know, that's still, there's still the potential for a much better functioning ecosystem. And so that includes, and I like this diagram because it shows the soil, you know, and you know, the air, right? And things that we don't always think about, those non-living parts as well. So a trophic pyramid then I think is helpful, especially when we're thinking about like different types of birds and plants and how it all, you know, fits together. And so especially at this time of year when females need to be really taking in protein, insects are really, really important for these songbirds. And so if they don't have enough protein, you know, they're not going to be able to lay those eggs. And then they need to really also be consuming a lot of protein in order to feed the nestlings. So there just needs to be a lot of insects. So that's why, you know, migration, you know, I mean, I would speculate that somehow, I mean, I don't know exactly how migration started, but, you know, like we need to go where the insects are, right? So we're going to go down to tropical areas where, you know, there's no winter really. You know, you've got rainy season, dry season, you've got other impacts, but you don't necessarily have winter, right? And you have also like pretty consistent daylight. It gets light at 6, dark at 6, you know, so you have very intricate plant relationships and then you have a lot of insects. So that's a really great place to go during the winter when you don't have as many insects. So thinking about just lots of plants, then insects, then songbirds, and then, you know, also when we're attracting birds to our yard, we have to think about also birds as predators in addition, you know, and they're predators because they're eating the insects too, but you don't think about it as much when you're feeding them seed, you know, that you know, that fits into it as well. So in thinking about this, these are some of the predators that really enjoy the fact that I feed the birds. And that includes the merlin, which is the little one. It's kind of a dark photo that I took at the top of my coastal redwood tree. And then a Cooper's hawk that's actually sitting right on my platform feeder. And I'm not sure if it was this individual, but one of these guys caught a Eurasian collar dove, and it like happened right in front of me. It was pretty intense. So, you know, this often brings these things to light. It also is another good reason to make sure that you have some way for these birds to see your windows, because especially when predators are hyper micro focused on their prey, they don't see obvious things. So it's a really vulnerable time for them to get like hit by a car and stuff like that, because they get so focused on catching their prey. So in thinking about habitat and thinking about food, you know, really studies have shown that a lot of the really high quality food for birds comes from native plants. And it's not that they don't eat other plants, it's just that oftentimes some of the higher nutrition has been shown to come from the native plants that are in the area. And so, and just thinking about like looking at birds, you know, a yellow warbler isn't a bird that we're really probably going to attract, you know, to our yard with like feeders and so forth. They're, you know, really strictly eating insects if you look at that thin straight bill. Whereas with the American goldfinch, which is very much a bird that we can attract with, you know, specialized feeders, you know, the finch feeders, and then the specialized food, either the fine sunflower chips or the thistle. You know, you can look at that conical bill and you can kind of imagine, oh yeah, that looks like it'd be good for being able to break open those seeds. So different feeder designs and different types of food attract different species of birds. And so my favorite thing is to try to attract as much as possible. And, you know, and I document that through eBird, which is a really fun way. And it really helps you with your bird identification, because it, you know, each list that you generate helps to break down like what are the most common birds that you're going to list or that you're going to see in your area. So, and that includes the pine siskin, which probably most of you are familiar with from this past year because of the huge salmonella outbreak and the fact that we had a giant eruption of pine siskins from further north, and they're still around. Like I still hear them, and I still haven't put out a lot of my feeders because, you know, they're still here. And, you know, I'm still sensitive to the fact that there's still, you know, there's still kind of that potential for passing of disease through the feeders. And then also ruby crown kinglet, which I think has pretty much taken off at this point from my yard, but I still have a few, you know, like usually I don't have juncos over summer, but I still have a few around. So I think the fox sparrow might have moved on. I think my warblers, my Townsend's warblers are all gone. So, you know, it just, it's a time of year for lots of movement and change as everyone gets on their breeding territory. So ground feeders love platform feeders. And the key is making sure that there's good drainage. So as you can see where the towhee's standing in the top left-hand corner with the peanuts, you know, you can see that that's like a wire mesh on the bottom, which seems to work pretty well for drainage. And then the platform feeder also has a roof, so that's helpful as well. So some of these sparrow-like birds include the spotted towhee, which has the nice chestnut on the sides, the dark-eyed junco, which is the black-headed bird with the kind of pink bill, the fox sparrow, which looks very much like a song sparrow, so I put it right next to each other. But you can see that the fox sparrow is a little bit more kind of fluffy and bulky. It's got yellow on its bill, especially on the bottom, unlike the all gray slate color of the song sparrow. It's got less kind of gray in the face. It's got a different spotting pattern. The spots don't kind of merge together and look streaky like in the song sparrow. It's got a little bit more prominent of an eye ring, a little bit shorter of a tail. So these are hard birds to tell apart. It really, I really oftentimes need to use binoculars. Like I kind of think I know, but then I like to always check. So when compared to native plants, feeders are more so for our enjoyment of the birds. So I think this is important. And I think the salmonella outbreak helped to reiterate that. Like, we're not necessarily, the birds are adaptive. It's not like domesticated pets. Like, they can take care of themselves. So it's nice to know that, like, you can go on vacation, you can do something, the birds will be okay. And so, if anything, you kind of, I feel kind of guilty about the Anna's hummingbirds, but luckily my neighbors feed the Anna's hummingbirds too. So, I know that they have somewhere else to go. I showed the pictures of the males, and I just wanted to show pictures of the females because these are a little bit harder to tell apart. So there's two pictures of Anna's, but then there's one picture of Rufus. So the female that has the Rufus on the side, so the top right hand corner, that's the female Rufus, but she still has a green back, just like the Anna's does. So she's a little bit harder to tell apart. Also a smaller bird, but definitely a little bit more tricky. But even the juvenile Rufus still have some Rufus on them. So you really got to look for that Rufus color kind of on the sides of the birds. So warblers prefer insects, but will dine on, and I've kind of been experimenting with this, fruit suet, bark butter. They like also the peanut butter suet, jam or jelly, sugar water. They can't access a hummingbird feeder, but I've actually from Wild Birds purchased an Oriole feeder, and then the Oriole feeder has these little compartments, and then I just put the sugar water in there. It's kind of annoying because I have to fill it up like every day, because then the hummingbirds also eat from the compartments, and I'm kind of like, hey, that's not for you, but they're very competitive about their food, and so they definitely chase off other hummingbirds, but they will even go after the orange crown warbler because it's a little smaller than the Townsend's warbler, so I've even seen them harassing them. And then also find sunflower chips too, although I haven't really been feeding that because of the salmonella outbreak. I've kind of kept that out because that's highly attractive to finches, which have mostly been carrying the disease, is not only the pine siskins, but the house finches and the goldfinches too. I have not really experimented with this because I'm always looking for the least expensive options, but you can consider spicy food if you're concerned about mammals, because mammals don't like the spice. And so if you're worried about mammals, I just try to keep the food away from the mammals, so only have it in, make sure the mammals can't access it, or make sure that I only put out enough food that the birds can finish. But this is another way if you're concerned about rodents, just to know that it does exist. And so some people do try that. So there are three concerns when feeding birds: cover, critters, and crap. And so cover is making sure that the food doesn't get wet. Critters is making sure that you're not inadvertently feeding rats and other things that you don't want around your house. And crap is to make sure to avoid salmonella. Now, salmonella can also be spread through mucus, but I think that the fecal, mixing in the fecal is really, you know, a lot of times what's driving these things. So the cover, you want to make sure the roofs have adequate overhang and protects the food from potentially toxic mold. Critters, you want to make sure that you place a baffle below the feeders on the poles to stop the critter access. So you can see the raccoon has been baffled, whereas the rat and the squirrel have not. And then crap, you want to make sure to clean the feeders every time you fill them. And if you ever notice sick birds, you want to decontaminate and remove the food source. So bird baths, drip irrigation, plates, or shallow bowls filled with pebbles all provide water for birds and insects. And I think Rose talked about experimenting with a bird bath, like a moving water source. And a lot of birds, like the hummingbirds, will only come if there's moving water. And so that is something that you can incorporate into your existing bird bath, or you can even, you know, get a pump and have like a moving fountain, and that will attract different birds to that water source then. And so here we've got a pine siskin bathing at the top. We've got an upset goldfinch because I have not yet changed the water. And then we've got a young immature robin in the bottom. So bird baths should be at least 1 inch deep, but no more than 3 inches deep. And so this is something that I often see, you know, like fountains that are too deep for the birds. So it's just not safe for them. They can't swim. That's why, you know, I mean, unless they're like a dipper or something, then they can totally swim. But a lot of the birds are not, you know, able to swim. And so we don't want them to drown. So, and, you know, that's why they're often really cautious and they might not go to your bird bath. Also, I had a fountain, no birds were going to it. I moved it like 10 feet over towards some trees, and then now they use it all the time. So, you know, you kind of have to just like a nest box, be experimental and try different placements, because it's sometimes hard to think like a bird and to anticipate like, you know, a shadow or something that they're not going to like. So this is an evening grosbeak, a beautiful, beautiful adult there drinking. And then cedar waxwings, which are always, sometimes people's spark bird is the waxwing, the bird that kind of gets them into birding. And then the chestnut back chickadee. And you can see that rock that's in there too. That's kind of a nice way that allows, oftentimes, I don't know if that rock specifically would be appropriate, but more like flat rocks often allow for bees to safely get water too. And bird baths should have gently sloping sides and a rough surface. And so this is what I was telling you about. Now, these are orange crown warblers. They would probably not go to my bird bath, but they definitely love the fountain. So they love that moving water. They play with it, you know, they'll fight each other over it, you know, because of course, like if one bird is taking a bath, then like everyone else wants to take a bath too, you know, which is pretty adorable. So about 70% of breeding birds in the Pacific Northwest feed on mostly insects, and insects prefer to feed on native plants. So as a kind of budding gardener, I see why people go with the plants that are most common at the nursery, because they don't get attacked by insects, right? But that's actually a bad thing. Actually, you want plants, you know, you don't want the insects to kill the plants, but you want to see that there's some holes in the leaves of your plants that they're getting nibbled on by insects. That's actually a good sign, because that is something that then the birds are going to feed on the insects. And, you know, there's lots of life stages that are going on. as well. So you might only see the adult insects, but that doesn't mean that there's a larval phase and an egg phase and other things that can also be eaten as well. And so this is a great native plant, the salmonberry. It can be utilized, both the flower and the fruit, by birds, and a really popular shrub, also popular with deer and with elk. So you want to aim for about 70% or more native plants in your yard. And obviously you're not going to just like tomorrow be able to do this, but this is like kind of like a lifetime goal. And so 5 native shrubs for your Pacific Northwest garden. So make sure you write this down. I'll go over these twice because these are some great ones that are usually have, I think most of them, maybe not the ocean spray, but I think a lot of these have good like nursery potential to find. I maybe the Indian plum, no, and maybe the ocean spray, no, but definitely the salal, red flowering currant, red osier dogwood, and evergreen huckleberry. You should be able to find those. Maybe you might not find, you might find like a cultivar of it or one that's, you know, been bred slightly differently. You kind of got to watch out for those, but if that's your only option, it's better than nothing. So in the top left-hand corner with the little bell, the little white flowers, that's salal, S-A-L-A-L. And then the kind of looks like a spring of water, like white spring of water. That's ocean spray, like ocean and spray, ocean spray. They often like to grow near water. And then, but, you know, I've seen them planted up on the Hurricane Ridge Road, and they're there too. Oftentimes you can see the dead flowers, and so that helps you identify that shrub. It's kind of a messy shrub. It wouldn't be, you know, like a centerpiece for your garden, but it definitely, if you have like a perimeter or somewhere, you could sneak it in. It's a really good wildlife plant. Bush tits like to build their nests in ocean spray, along with, I'm sure, other birds as well. And then red flowering currant. This is one that I think Ribes sanguinum. And this one you definitely can find in nurseries, and oftentimes in different colors. You might be able to find them in white and like a really deep shade of red. The natives are going to kind of vary in different shades of pink. And then Indian plum or ozoberry is the next one, if we're going around clockwise after the red flowering currant. And it's one of the first shrubs to bloom in spring. And at this point, they just have vibrant green leaves, and the leaves are just, you know, the plant is like putting on new growth. So it's kind of way ahead of the others. And it's just nice to have that really green deciduous plant that's so earlier than the others. Then the next one is red osier dogwood. The deer kind of have liked that one, so I have actually fenced it off. But if you have kind of a wetter part, they are moisture loving. But it's a very beautiful plant it's pretty shade tolerant as well. And then evergreen huckleberry is the next one with the blue berries that are supposed to be very delicious, although you can leave them for the birds. They're not like, you know, your cultivated blueberries. Like, they're pretty small, but I've heard that they're quite tasty and pretty slow growing plant. So you kind of got to give that one some time. It can tolerate sun or shade. Salal, like shade, ocean spray seems to be pretty tolerant either way. Red flowering currant, also you do kind of have to protect that a little bit from the deer at the beginning when they're very small. It seems like once they get bigger, you know, maybe it seems like they kind of leave it alone a little bit more. Indian plum, it seems like the deer are not interested in that. Red osier dogwood, I'm protecting that one. And then I have not put the evergreen huckleberry in the yard, so I'm not quite sure how the deer would do with that one. So native plants occur in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat, and native plants and animals depend on each other. So this is a slide I found off the internet. This is I think that's boy, that one's a tricky one. I think that one's a chipping sparrow, or is it a white crowned sparrow?
Chipping.
Well, oh, thank you. Get those two confused. I think that the white crown has the eye line would continue all the way to the bill. So I think that's how you identify them. And then the goldfinch, American goldfinch, this is in its like winter or basic plumage, and so it doesn't look at all like its counterpart necessarily during the breeding season. I'm not sure what plants these are on. I hope that that's not a butterfly bush, but I really hope it's not. I'm not sure what they're feeding on in these photos, but I just wanted to use it as an example of, especially with like asters, and if you have like coneflowers or anything like that, and Rudbeckia, the birds really like to feed on those seed heads. So if you can, leave the seed heads for as long as possible until you see the birds aren't using them. So just kind of try to change your cleanup time in your garden from the fall until the spring as much as possible, and as much as it makes sense based on what the birds like to eat. So native plants support 10 to 15 times more wildlife species than non-native plants. And so this is flowering dogwood being eaten by a cedar waxwing. And these are not, I have found some really great flowering dogwood if you've ever been on the Storm King Trail at Lake Crescent on Barnes Point. Really nice dogwoods. If you ever go up there in the fall, you'll like see a lot of these berries. Difficult one to grow here. I think usually you have to go with like a hybrid species. I don't totally understand why, but I think it has to do with disease or something of that nature. But the dogwoods are definitely a cool small understory kind of tree. And then as much as possible, you want to try to choose straight native plant species, not cultivars, and opt for local options first. So and keep in mind that this is like changing, really quickly. So like now we have Shore Road Nursery that's starting up. And, they kind of have like at this point, like a set list of species. And then, you kind of like pick what you want and then organize the time to like come and pick them up. So it's not like a classic nursery, where you can like go and browse and stuff. Like it's more like this is like specific native plants, and they gather the seeds locally and they grow the plants. And so this is a really cool thing. And then I have not ordered anything yet from this other company that's up Bell Hill or near Bell Hill or somewhere near Bell Hill in Squim. You can find them online. And I think they also have like a special, like you order and then, you arrange a time to go pick them up. So, and these are just pretty new. Like I think the Bell Hill one is just like within the past year or two. And then the Shore Road, I just ordered some plants last fall. So, and I was really excited because I was super worried about this lupin that I bought, but I moved it to a sunnier spot and now it's like coming up. So I just messed up where I planted it. It was a little too shady. So, so anyway, very exciting. This is a service berry, which I bought a lot of at the Conservation District plant sale. And I put them in pots because I want to plant them out in the fall. And I'm very excited. And this evening grosbeak is also very excited. Look at all of the juice on its bill. And actually, if you've ever birded in the tropics, I have been confused by birds because of like nectar and juice that sometimes totally will change like the color of the area around their beak or their chest. And so you really have to keep that in mind, that can actually really change the look of a bird. So native plants are less resource intensive. You want to plant them in the fall, including lupin seeds. And a lot of native plants need to go through stratification. And I've just recently been experimenting with this. And so, you know, I get on my flats, plant the seeds in the fall, leave them out over the winter outside, and now they're coming up. And so actually though, with this weather lately, I've been like watering them. But you know, it's been pretty exciting. And I don't have success on all of them, but like piggyback plant has been really easy, and foam flower has been really easy. So it really just depends on which species. My friend has had a lot of success with lupin. And she just basically, her advice is, as soon as you see the first true leaf, then you should transplant it. And then the advice from Shore Nursery is that you should not disturb the roots at all. And so, and these are lupin here. And these are not birds that you would typically, you know, have in your yard. But if you have, you know, if you happen to live near a marsh, you're going to have, you know, a common yellowthroat. Same with the Lincoln sparrow, which is on the right, which looks very similar to a song sparrow. But it's got that kind of like tan color, and more like almost like someone took a fine paintbrush and painted on the little stripes on its chest. So it looks a little bit different face too, a little more gray. So anyway, yeah, these are not birds that you would typically attract with bird feeders, but you might be able to attract them if you happen to live near a certain habitat type. So bare root native trees and shrubs. I was introduced to the Conservation District through their plant sale, which is an amazing event. And in prior years, pre-orders are due in January, and then the orders are picked up in late February or early March at Lazy J Tree Farm. And so kudos to Megan and Jennifer and Judy and Joe for putting together a great plant sale that was COVID friendly. I just pulled up, somebody loaded the plants, and I was out of there. So it was a really, really successful plant sale. So it'll be interesting to see like how we go back to normal. Like I wasn't able to pick up random willow trees like I did in a prior year, which I was super excited about, and my willows are doing really well. So, you know, there is some like fun to, you know, shopping. But, you know, given the safety considerations, I thought it was really great. So definitely something that if you're new to the area, definitely want to check out the plant sale. So assorted potted native plants. So in addition to Shore Road and the one I described at Bell Hill, there's also the new Dungeness Nursery, which is over, you know, near the mouth of the Dungeness River. And then there's also Eagle Creek Tractor and Garden Services. And they also, you can, you know, do a specialty thing, or they sell their plants at Wild Birds Unlimited. So good to, you know, keep all the native plant options, you know, give these people your business, you know, try out, you know, some of the different places. So you want to keep all birdscaping installations like food and water away from cats. Cats are really, really good predators, and there's really no way to like train a cat to not be a good predator. It's just really instinct. So a study by the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute reported that between 1.4 billion and 3.7 billion birds are killed each year by cats roaming outdoors. So really something, you know, kind of to always keep in mind. Cat predation is a major threat to bird populations, especially those already on decline due to habitat loss. So one great option that I've definitely seen around Port Angeles is the catio. And so you can see here some different designs. One that, you know, also is available for your dog, but, you know, your cat can be like, hey, look at me, dog. And then, you know, one that's just kind of out the window. So a couple different options. And, you know, I've talked to people, and the whole reason they got into feeding birds was to entertain their cats. So it's hard to necessarily, you know, separate out cats and birds, you know, unless you kind of do it in a, okay, here's the fence, you know, and like, or here's the window, you know what I mean? Like have that separation between the two. So speaking of windows, you want to make sure to think about how you want to avoid bird strikes. And you can, if you're using feeders, sometimes you can move your feeders closer to or further away from windows. And then there's all sorts of like stickers and different things that you can put, and you do have to put that on the outside of the problem window. You can also suspend mylar balloons, plastic strips, pie pans, Christmas decorations, or CDs to the outside of your window. And one solution that we came up with, and, you know, it's kind of great too, because we have these huge picture windows, and just dealing with stickers and stuff, I was kind of like, and so we found a really cheap solution, and you don't notice it from the street because, you know, it's just fine enough that you don't really see it. But, you know, you definitely see a reaction from the birds, like as they get closer, like they definitely see it, and it's saved. I don't even know how many birds, but basically we just got some bamboo, and we put just a couple little hooks on the outside of the house, kind of under the, I guess, soffit, and then hung the bamboo with that has the deer netting attached to it, and it just hangs down, and it has really been great. Occasionally a bird gets stuck behind it and freaks out, but they almost always find their way out, and more than one bird definitely lands on the outside of it. So, and it's definitely saved some hawks from, you know, some accipiters from hitting the window. So it's been good. This is the Cooper's hawk that I was telling you that killed the Eurasian collar dove. So that's a Eurasian collar dove there that I got. And then, you know, there's, you know, I don't know how well these silhouettes work, but that's definitely a very beautiful looking one. So you can also string bird feathers about 8 inches apart on fishing line, and then hang the lines of feathers vertically across the windows. And really it's these big picture windows that are oftentimes problematic, but, you know, sometimes you'd be surprised. I mean, sometimes you can just put screens in and that'll solve the problem. So there's a lot of creative solutions. So we're going to transition to critters. You want to make sure to cover food scraps with dirt or vegetation and compost piles, feed dogs or cats inside the house, and clean up dog poop. All these things can be attractants for critters, specifically rats. So an invasive species is a non-native species whose presence decreases the biological diversity of the community that it comes into. And so a starling is one that is a huge concern, especially when it comes to nest boxes, because they compete for very limited cavity space with our native species. I'm not as concerned with feeding. You know, it's more like I'm cheap and I don't want to pay for food for a starling. So it's more like that angle. The starlings are pretty shy birds. So, I mean, they're not like, you know, but they will come and they will clean up if given the opportunity, and they, you know, will travel around in flocks and so forth. So, you know, I am most concerned though about the nest boxes and as competitors. So in rural areas, house sparrows compete with native birds for limited nesting cavities. So same as the starling, slightly more of a concern because of their size. So they are a small bird. And so if you have, you know, it's hard to get. You basically have to have 1 1/8 inch, or you will have house sparrows. So that's you know, that size, the 1 1/8 is really only going to allow for chickadees to get in. So the house finch outcompetes its relative, the purple finch, in human altered settings. And so this is another one. They're also definitely carriers of disease, additionally, from what I've seen, which seems to be just after the pine siskins, just seems to be kind of a finch kind of thing. You want to baffle your nest box poles to protect from egg and nestling predation. So you can see how the squirrel has changed the nest box hole. And so that's going to be a problem. And raccoons will feast on bird food, wash their food hands in your bird bath, and eat eggs and nestling. So you also got to watch out for them. They're mostly active at night too, so it's a little hard to catch them in the act. So one way to isolate possible native nest predators from your yard installation is to provide them with habitat of their own. So you can see here that, and I haven't gotten really into feeding the Steller's jays, but it is pretty fun to give them a peanut because they're just so excited about it. And then the Douglas squirrel there has a nest box, although I think something bad happened to my female who had 2 babies, who was an avid feeder at my squirrel box. I think something happened to her because I haven't really had any action at my feeder. I know there's Douglas squirrels around because I've seen them, and maybe it's a good thing that they're a little bit more shy. Maybe that's to their benefit to not be coming to feeders. So you want to make sure your feeders are high enough off the ground to stay out of the reach of deer. And obviously the deer are an issue when considering new plants and making sure that, you know, the deer don't stop your plants from becoming larger plants. And bird baths can be made accessible for bees, butterflies, and other wildlife. So the slideshow information was sourced from the Washington Department of Wildlife, Bring Birds Back, Real Gardens Grow Natives, which I bought this book and I love it. I highly recommend it, Real Gardens Grow Natives. It's at Port Book and News if you're local. How to Create a Bird-Friendly Yard, and then Birdwatchers Digest. So with that, I'm going to stop the share and open it up for questions. So it looks like there's a question from Lyle and Rose about the native plant nurseries. Okay, so there's Shore Road, and you know, I should have written down their email, because that's currently, I think, how you have to communicate. I'll tell you what, I will try to share that next time, the email for Shore Road. And then I can't remember the name of the one over, which is why I'm saying over by Swim, but I have to look that one up as well. So I will look those up for you and get those. But the ones that are like, you know, you can just show up to, like you can show up at Wild Birds and look at their plants, and their plants are all outside. They have kind of a really cool natural area, if you haven't been there, that has like a nice water feature and plants. And then the Dungeness Nursery. So those are the two that are like you can just show up there. The other ones you kind of have to, you know, I think special order, unless they've changed something. I don't know about it. And then I've actually gotten some great native plants recently. Couple options that are just new is there's a botanical garden that's literally like 5 miles from the Kingston Ferry over on the other side. And that's the Kruckberg Botanical Garden, who also has a book on native plants. That's I also purchased, although I prefer Real Gardens Grow Natives to tell you the truth, but it is a really nice, like very extensive list of native plants, and native used rather loosely because it's for a much larger geographical area. But that botanical garden also has a nursery. And so, and especially if you have shade, it's mostly a shade botanical garden. So they mostly have shade native plants available. And then there's also another company that's out of Bellingham, but you can also pick up plants. They have a couple stores nearby. So like there's one in Mount Vernon, for example, called Plantus Nativus. And I've picked up a lot of native plants from them as well. So yeah, once you start searching, you'll see that there's actually a fair number of options. And then there's like, you know, different specialty sales and stuff like that you also can just keep an eye out. But definitely check out New Dungeness Nursery. I mean, they have a whole native plant area that's pretty extensive. Okay, does feeding mammals spicy food work? I don't know. Can anyone speak to that? I haven't actually tried it. According to Wild Birds, it works.
I tried it, but I still have a lot of squirrels. So
okay,
we can work on them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rose. Not sure it works. Maybe not worth the money. All right. Any other questions? No.
No, thank you for the talk. It was very informative, even though you're far, far away. But you know, it's everything leads to the same place. We use native plants. We have native birds that come to our yard, and so, you know, we keep trying, and every season is different.
Ah, yes. What are some of your favorite native plants for your area that you have in your yard?
Well, as I wrote in the chat, some of the berry bushes we planted are high bush cranberries,